Today's daf we're going to be learning is Chullin daf Samach Hey. This is the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started from the bottom of Samach Dalet Amud Bet. We were talking about the Yeina and the Bat Yeina, and oftentimes they're mentioned. They're really one and the same. But in this particular instance, we said Shanei Hacha de Pasuk Sifra l'Shtei Tevot. They split it into two words. And because they were split into two words, it seems clear that it's two different creatures, meaning it teaches you that the egg is also not kosher. Okay, Ela me'ata. Now they say, first of all, this whole issue is a little bit strange because Bat Yeina, they already said, is the same as the Yeina, and even though in other places it appears as two different words, so it's a little bit strange. The Gemara is going to ask a different question, which eventually will lead them to kind of respond to that question as well, even though they don't ask it directly. Ela me'ata, from here, what can you infer? And as Ela me'ata, if you're going to say that when the Sofrim split it into two words, it means it's two different species. Et kedar la'omer, de pasuk lehu sifra bitrei. The Sofrim split up the word kedar la'omer. Okay, he was a king, if you remember. It was in the war with Avram and the 4 kings. Of the 5 kings, there's kedar la'omer. Now, according to the Gemara here, his name is split into 2 words. And then they're going to say, what? You're saying that's 2 people? It's obviously one person. His name was kedar la'omer. Now, it's interesting. In our text of the Torah, we have it as 1 word. But there must have been variant texts that had it split up in 2. And that's what the Gemara is referring to. Hachanami de tartishme ninu, right? You're going to say it's 2 names. Amre, so they answer no. There's a difference between those 2 words and these 2 words. And that's going to also explain the difference between the Bat Yeina that's mentioned here and in the other places. Amre hatam b'shtei tevo pasik lehu. B'shnei shitin lo pasik lehu. In the other places, in Kedar la'omer, it's split up, but they would never put it on 2 different lines. So it appears as 2 words, but not on 2 different lines. But here, they would even, the Sofrim would split it on 2 lines, which means that it's 2 completely separate words, which is going to say that this means it's the egg of the Yeina. Now we're going to move back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah, way back in Daf Nun Ted, had given us the simanim of an oaf that's kosher, a kosher bird, right? So even though the simanim, right, the simanim of the bird weren't mentioned in the Torah, but Amru Chachamim, Kol Of Hadores Tameh, any bird who is a bird that prays, okay, which we had different interpretations. Either Rashi says on the Mishnah there that Ho'chez b'tziv pornav u'magbiyah min hakarka mashochel, okay, it takes its claws and it picks up what it eats off the ground. A different interpretation was the Rambam and Perush HaMishnah says, and Rashi somewhere quotes this, but it holds its feet down on what it's eating so it doesn't get away. Another interpretation of Tosfot, it eats its prey while it's still alive. And another interpretation is that it kills its prey with its claws. Okay, so that's an Of Dores, whichever interpretation we go with. Dores, so that's number 1. I'm just going to continue in the Mishnah before we go to the Gemara here. I'm back on the Mishnah on Nun Tet. Kol sheyesh lo etzbe yiteraf, it has an extra finger or an extra digit, which we said also when we described the Mishnah, many people think it means it's one going in the other direction as the others. Then we said, right, v'zefek, it has a crop, that's where it chews up its food, and korkavno niklaf. Right, and the korkavan, which is the gizzard, has this layer that peels right off. Okay, now we're going to move on to the Gemara on this section. Tanya, we're going to quote a Braita. Rabban Gamliel Omer, Dores v'ochel v'yadua shu tamei. If it's Dores, it preys on other birds and eats it, v'yadua shu tamei, then you know it's tamei immediately. You know this is not kosher. Yesh lo etzbe yetera v'zefek u'korkavno niklaf, the other 3 simanim that we saw, b'yadua shu tahor. If you have those other 3, then you know it's tahor. And the question is, how do these work together? So Rashi has one interpretation, and Rashi says, first you look, is it a doles? If you know it's a doles, if it's a bird of prey, then you basically say definitely not kosher. But if it doesn't have signs of an of doles, then you have to check, does it have the other 3 simanim? Okay? Rabbeinu Tam says, no, if it has the other three simanim, then you know it's not a bird who prays. And then, right, so that according to him, it's either one or the other, and one is an indicator of the other. Okay? So, according to Rabbeinu Tam, if you know it's not a bird of prey, or you know it has the three simanim, you don't have to worry about it being a bird of prey. It definitely isn't. Okay? Whereas Rashi thinks it could not be a bird of prey and yet still needs these three simanim because it still could be not kosher. It doesn't have those three signs. Now we're going to hear all different. This bright is going to bring a lot of other different signs of kosher birds. Rabbi Lazar, Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Motchin lo chut shel meshicha. We stretch out a string. Okay, this also, by the way, right? I think this was in the Mishnah. Yeah, this was also in the Mishnah. Just was in a bit of a different words. Motchin lo chut shel meshicha. Im choleket raglav shtayim lakan v'shtayim lakan tamei. If it splits its legs, two on one side, two on the other side of the string, then it's not kosher. And shalosh lakan ve'echad lakan tahor. But if three on one side and one on the other, then you know it's a kosher bird. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar. Now we're going to get other ones that we didn't see in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, kol ofa kolet min ha'avil tamei. If it catches its prey in the air, okay, it catches or its food in the air and eats, it's kosher. It's not kosher. So the Gemara says, tziparta nami mikla kalta. But wait, we know about it tziparta, and it catches its food also in the air and eats it. So, how are we going to explain that? Amar Abaye, koleit va'ochel ka'amrinan. Okay, I actually didn't say this well enough. The tziparta actually just catches its food in the air. And what Abaye says is, it has to catch it and eat it for it to be problematic. In the tziparta, it just catches it. It doesn't catch it and eat it. Achirim omrim, shachen im tmeim tamei, im tahorim tahor. If it lives, okay, this is a great line. If it hangs out with, okay, maybe even birds are more likely to call it hanging out, okay, the birds hang out with, fly with, are together with other non-kosher birds, that's a sign it's a non-kosher bird. Im tahorim tahor. If it's with kosher birds, then you assume it's kosher. This is the famous phrase, okay, we're using it now with birds, but oy l'rasha, oy l'shcheno, tov l'tzadik, tov l'shcheno, right? If you're with good people, right, they'll influence you positively, you'll be a good person. If you're living with bad people, the influence, right, the peer pressure is not such a good thing. So, right, it could bring you to be bad. So the same thing with the birds. And that's a way of figuring out, is a bird kosher or not kosher? Now, this is the opinion of Acherim, who we often attribute to Rabbi Meir. And now the Gemara says, Keman, according to who is this opinion? And they say, Ke Rabbi Eliezer. We're going to see a machloka between Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis. We're not going to see the rabbi's position, but obviously they disagree with Rabbi Eliezer. D'Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo l'chinam halach zarzir eitz alorev. It's not by chance that the zarzir, which the Schottenstein translates as a starling bird, hangs out with the raven. Okay, it's not by chance. Ela mipnei shehu mino, because it's his type, meaning the raven is not kosher and neither is the zarzir. So there you have it. In other words, Rabbi Eliezer says the zarzir is not kosher. How do we know? Because it hangs out with the raven. So it sounds like that opinion of Acherim that you can judge by who they hang out with would be an indicator of whether they're kosher or not. But now the Gemara says, Afilu tema Rabbanan. You can even explain that position according to the rabbis. Shachen v'nidma ka'amrina. Because when we said if it hangs out with tmeim, it's tamei, what we mean is it dwells with them, shachen, or it's its neighbor, and nidma, and is similar to them. The zarzir and the raven are different. They're not similar in habit, in nature, and all that. So they have to be both living and similar. Just by living alone doesn't mean that living near does not mean you're going to be like them. Okay, moving now to chagavim. Okay, we're moving into the grasshopper issues. So now if we go back to the Mishnah had said, there's signs of a kosher grasshopper. Number 1, kol sheyesh lo arba raglayim, 4 legs. Arba knafayim, 4 wings. Kartzulayim, 2 extra jumping legs. Knafav chofin et rubo, and its wings cover the majority of the body of it. Rabbi Yossi Omer, he adds, I'm just back in the Mishnah still, ushmo chagav, and also it has to be something that you call a chagav. If it's not called a chagav, it's not a grasshopper, and it's not kosher. So now we're going to see the rest of today's stuff is going to be on the chagavim, the grasshoppers, And we're going to see first we're going to start with a bit of a machloket among the Amoraim, and then we're going to move into a few two Braito mainly. One we're going to spend a lot of time on. So b'chagavim kol sheyesh lo, my rubo. So what's this? The wings have to cover the majority of the body. Which part of the body? So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Rov or Kos. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rav, most of the length of the grasshopper. Va'amrei la, but some people say Rov hekefo, most of the circumference of it, which probably means from one side of the body of it over to the other side, right? The circumference of the body, kind of like the width, but even more, right? Covering more of that down the sides. Amar Rav Papa. Now, we have two versions of what Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav. Is it the majority of its length or the majority of its circumference? So Amar Rav Papa, this is, by the way, classic for a puppy. He does this a lot in brachot, where he's going to combine the two, okay? He does it with brachot, where someone said you should end the bracha this way, and someone said that way, and he says, oh, let's just say them both, and let's put them together. So Amar Rav Papa, hilchach be'inam rov, or ko u'be'inam rov hekefo. If you want to eat a grasshopper and claim it's kosher, well, you need both. Even though really they're mutually exclusive, because he either said that or he said that. But Rav Papa likes to kind of be harmonious, bring it all together, and say, well, let's just do both. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, first Braita. Ein lo achshav v'atid legadel la'achar zman. What if it doesn't have, now it's a good question which we're talking about, either the wings aren't long enough, or maybe it doesn't have the jumping legs yet. Okay, it doesn't have maybe any of these simanim, but it's going to grow them down the road. Okay, this happens, right? Insects especially evolve. So grasshoppers as well, like kigon hazachal, like something called a zachal, which we don't know the exact identification of, but something they call a zachal, mutal. So it's permitted, even though it doesn't have this sign now, but since it will as it grows, as it matures, we can eat it, it's kosher. Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Yossi Omer, where do we get this from? He says, Asher lo kra'ayim. Okay, this is a pasuk. Okay, we're in Vayikra Yud Aleph, verse 21. We're going to move in a minute to verse 22. That's going to be the topic of the next Braita. But achid zeh tochlu, this is what you should eat. Mikol sheretz ha'of ha'olech al arba, from the shretzim of the bird family that go on all fours. Asher lo kra'ayim. Okay, it has kra'ayim mimal l'raglav, l'nater behen al aretz. Okay, it has this part that's above its legs that helps them to crawl on the land. Now, what it says here is asher lo kra'ayim. Now, lo, lamed vav, which is the way the pasuk reads, means it has kra'ayim. But the ktiv, the way it's written in the Torah, is lo with an aleph, which means it doesn't have, okay? Asher lo kra'ayim, it doesn't have these kra'ayim. So, how do we deal with this kri uchtiv, that it says not, but it means is? It's read as it does have. Okay, so what does it mean? Even though it doesn't have now, and will grow in the future. Okay, and now just a side point, my zacha, what is this zacha that we were wondering about? Although, don't get too excited, because it's not going to really help us, because Abaye is going to tell us in Aramaic what the name of this grasshopper is. Amar Abaye askara. Okay, he gives it a name, doesn't really help us. Okay, if you want the identification of all these grasshoppers we're going to talk about, I'm not going to spend my time on it, but in the Koran, they at least try to bring different suggestions as to what the identity of some of these different grasshoppers that we're going to mention. Not all of them, but many of them. Okay, I'm not going to spend too much time on that, though. Tanu Rabbanan. At Elu, so now we have another Braita, and this is the long Braita about the grasshoppers. So now we're going to darshan this next pasuk. I'll read you the whole pasuk. It's, again, chapter 11 of Vayikra, verse 22. Et ela mehem tochlu, from these you can eat. Et ha'arbet lemino, the arbet and its type. Et ha'salam leminehu, the salam and its type. Et ha'chargol lemineu, et ha'chagav lemineu. Okay, notice the word lemino, lemineu, lemineu, lemineu. Okay, lemineu comes, and its type. Okay, that's obviously an extra word. It's going to be adding something. And it brings 4 types of grasshoppers. Arbet, salam, chargol, and chagav. By the end of today, I don't know if you'll remember everything, but we're going to learn some of the differences between these different grasshoppers. So, first the Braita says, Eta arbeh. So what is arbeh? Arbeh ze govai. Okay, again, they're going to bring words that don't mean so much to us, but they're telling it in their terminology. They understood what that meant. Salam ze rashon. Okay, govai comes up, by the way, I believe in the Tanakh. I didn't do a good check, and I think it even comes up in davening somewhere. Something, I don't remember where, but it definitely comes up somewhere. You can probably run a quick search on Safaria and check it out. Salam ze rashon, chargol ze nipul, chagav ze gidyan. Okay, we have these 4 terms in the Torah with a name, and then the rabbi said, what is it in, the language that we use? Now, soon we're going to learn what the differences are between the different types. So, ma Tamud lomar, okay, we're going to learn that there's different things about them. In fact, maybe I'll tell you the 4 parameters, if I can remember them all by heart. The first one is, does it have what's called a gabachat, which means gabachat is when it has a bald spot at the top of its head. So, the arbeh does not have a gabachat, okay? Meaning it has hair at the top of its head. The next one, the salam, has a gabachat. Okay, I just want to make sure. Yes, it has a gabachat. Now, neither of the 2 of these have a tail. If you don't remember this all in your head right now, I'm trying to see if I remember it in my head. But we're going to get through all this in the Gemara today. Okay, so we have the arbeh has hair. The next one, the salam, does not have hair, and neither does the chargol. Okay, the chagav, we don't really have too much about the characteristics of a chagav, so we're not going to really talk about that too much. Then we have, now none of the 3 of these have large heads, okay, long heads. Okay, their heads are not long. And the first 2, the arbeh and the salam, have no tail, and the chagol has a tail. Okay, so we're going to see they each have different things about them. And what we're going to basically do is, since after each one it says limino or liminehu, what we're going to learn is each one is coming to include another case of another grasshopper that has the same characteristics. Either hair, right, not a gabachat, not bald, with a tail, without a tail, okay? So we're going to go through these different criteria. So now they're going to say, Ma Tamud lomar limino, arba pamim. Why do we have these extra words 4 times? Lahavi, to bring in 4 extra types of grasshoppers, or 4 extra grasshoppers. Lavi tziporet kramim, which is like the arbeh, which has hair. Yochana Yerushalmit, which has no hair and is like the salam. Ha'artzuviyah, which has a tail, which is like the chargol. And the razbanit, which is different from all the rest. Okay, we don't really know so much about this razbanit. Rashi just says, Eino domeh le'elu b'mareh. Okay, it's not like the way any of these look. Now, Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, in the house of Rabbi Yishmael, they brought this braita, and they basically darshaned it like this. Elu klale klalot ve'elu prate pratot. We have a lot of klals, general words. We have a lot of prats, right? We have basically in the pasuk, prat uklal, prat uklal, prat uklal, prat uklal, because we have the specific case, and then we have the general liminehu, and all types like that. So basically what we're going to say is, arbeh ze govai. So again, they're going to go back to what we saw before. The arbeh translates as the govai. The word limino comes lahavi siporet kramim. The one that we said is just like the arbeh. Again, they both have no gabachat, meaning they have hair. They also have no tail, and they also don't have a long head. Turning now to Amud Bet, ein li ela haba ve'en lo gabachat. Haba ve'yesh lo gabachat. So again, this only teaches us ones that, sorry, I just read that wrong. Ein li ela haba ve'en lo gabachat. All this includes is a grasshopper that doesn't have a gabachat, meaning it doesn't have that bald spot. Haba ve'yesh lo gabachat minayim. But where are we going to learn about one that has a gabachat, has that bald spot? Tamud lomar salam zenipul. So that's why we have the next word, salam, which comes to include the case that has a gabachat, the bald spot. Liminehu, what does that bring? Lahavi et, now what do you expect them to say? Yochana Yerushalmi, which is the next one on the list. Instead of saying that, it says laviya ta'ush kaf. Because this is a different braita, and this braita has a different word, a different kind of grasshopper. Now, of course, there's lots of grasshoppers that fall into the category of have gabachat, they have a bald spot. So this braita mentioned the achshuf, ushkaf, and the previous one mentioned this Yochana Yerushalmit. But both of them would be included in the word liminehu because they all have gabachat. Ein li ela, so now again, we're going to go through. What did we get so far? Haba ve'ein lo gabachat, the one with no bald spot. Haba ve'yesh lo gabachat, the one with a bald spot. But remember what I said before, maybe you don't remember, but neither of these have a tail. So, haba ve'ein lo zanav, and it includes ones that don't have a tail. But haba ve'yesh lo zanav minayim, but how do you know if it has a tail that it's going to be included also, that it's kosher? Tamud lomar chargol zerashon, because a chargol has a tail. So that teaches you, and ones that have a tail, or at least the chargol, which is a rashon. Liminehu lavi et hakarsefet ve'et hashalchanit. Okay, now the word liminehu that comes after the chargol comes to include two other ones, which are like the chargol that they have a tail. Now the chargol is similar to the salam. It also has gabachad, it has the bald spot, and it has a tail. Okay? And so does the karsefet and the shalchanit. And if we go back to the previous page, also the artsuviyah that was mentioned in the previous source. Ein li ella. So again, now that we got those three words, now we have ein li ella, well, it's really 6 words, each one, and liminehu. So we have haba ve'ein lo gabachat, haba ve'yesh lo gabachat, whether or not it has the bald spot or whether it does or doesn't. Haba ve'ein lo zanav, haba ve'yesh lo zanav, whether or not it has a tail. Haba ve'ein rosho aroch. Now all of these don't have a long head. So now we're going to include anything that has all these criteria or this or that and doesn't have a long head. So with a tail, without a tail, with a bald spot, without a bald spot, and no long heads. Haba v'rosho aroch minayin. What if it has a long head? Now you're expecting there to then go to the 4th word in the pasuk chagav, but that's not where they go. We're going to save chagav for a different drasha, and what they're going to do is they're going to say the following, which later Rav Achai is going to have a problem with, and he's going to reread this, but maybe you can already come up with what the problem is. But amarta harei tadam bebinyan av mishloshtan. So comes the Braita and says, well, look, we're going to make a binyan av from the 3 that we have. We already have the arbeh, the salam, the chargol. And from there, we're going to say, lo ri arbeh kiri chargol. The arbeh is not like the chargol because, again, one has a tail, one, right? The arbeh doesn't have a tail, the chargol does. Lo ri chargol kiri arbeh. The chargol is not like the arbeh either because it has a tail, the arbeh doesn't. Lo ri shnehem kiri salam. Now, the two of them are not like the salam because one has a gabacha, one doesn't have a gabacha. One has a tail, one doesn't have a tail, right? So each one differs in some way from the salam. V'lo ri salam kiri shnehem. And likewise, the salam isn't like both of those. Hatzana shaveh shebehen. So what's the least common denominator between them? And that's what we do when we take this, this is not like that, that's not like that. So let's take the bare minimum. What's similar about them? Sheyesh lo arba raglayim. Now we're finally getting to what we saw in the Mishnah. Because of all these 3 types, they all have 4 legs. They all have arba knafayim, 4 wings. Kartzulayim. They have the extra 2 jumping legs. Uknafav chofin et rubo. And their wings cover most of the body. Af kol sheyesh lo arba raglayim va'arba knafayim kartzulayim knafav chofin et rubo. So from there we're going to learn to all other grasshoppers that have those criteria, which then would include whether or not it has a long head or not. Okay? I just said that double, but whether or not it has a long head, that doesn't matter, because here's the least common denominator between them. There's an obvious problem here if you didn't figure it out, which is, what do you mean? The least common denominator is, and you have to add to the list, and they don't have long heads. Why don't we say that would have to be a criteria? Okay? So we're going to come back to that, because right now this binyan av doesn't really seem to relate to that issue. Now comes the Gemara and says, wait a minute. Halo hatzirtzul hazeh. Okay, there's another type of grasshopper. Yesh lo arba raglayim ve'arba knafayim ve'kartzulayim knafav chofei urubo. It has all 4 criteria. Yechol yeh mutar. You're going to tell me that's permitted. Now it's obvious that they don't think that's permitted. Tamuz lomar. We're finally getting to what do they do with the word chagav? Tamuz lomar chagav sheshmo chagav. A tzirtzur is not a type of chagav. Okay? I'm going to look and see if the Koran has a translation. I forgot what they say this is. Let's see for a minute. Koran's always very good with these kind of things, with the identification of different creatures. Tzirtzur, they say, let's see, apparently refers to crickets. Okay? So they suggest that it's crickets. So crickets, I should have known that. It's tzirtzur in Hebrew, I think, is cricket. Okay, so a cricket, they're going to say, what, is that kosher? Nobody thinks a cricket's kosher. So they say, yeah, because it's not called a grasshopper. Okay, it's not in the family of grasshoppers. All these others were obviously in the family of grasshoppers. So the word chagav comes to tell you that unless you call it a chagav, this matches what we saw Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah, if it's called a chagav, then it could be a grasshopper. That could be kosher. But if it doesn't go by the name grasshopper, then it's definitely not kosher, and that's what the tzirtzur. So the Gemara says, Ishmo chagav yacholim b'kol simanim alalu. Wait, but then any grasshopper, even if why'd you bother with all the 4 simanim? You should have just said whatever is called grasshopper. Talmud lomar liminehu. That's what we need the word liminehu to tell us. Ad sheyehebo kol hasimanim halalu. The last Lemineu comes to say, it has to be called Chagav, but it also has to have all the simanim that we discussed from the first three. Okay? And that's where we end the Braita. Parech Rav Achai. Now Rav Achai comes and says, Ma lahanach. Okay, by the way, the question, Halor Tzur, I think I said the Gemara asked that question. It was still in the Braita. The Braita was asking the question. That's how the Braita comes to the last drasha from the word Chagav. Chagav comes to exclude the crickets. Now comes Rav Achai, and he asks a question on this Braita. And he says, Ma lahanach shekain ein rosh hanaroch. But I don't get it. You're learning a binyan av, about the least common denominator between those first three. And then you say, right, that includes something that actually isn't found in all three. Why would you do that? Why don't you just say, just like all three of them don't have long heads, so it has to be any grasshopper without a long head. How did you get to, even if it has a long head? So they say, B'chitem, if you want to answer, Rav Achai says, Kevin deshavu ba'arba'a simanim, maitina v'lo parchina. Look, klal u'prats work in general where it's going to be kind of similar. Don't ask questions. That's what it means. Maybe you'd say, look, it's already got four types of similarities, right, between the four of them. Maybe even if it doesn't have that fifth, we'll just, right, even if its head isn't long, we'll just say bring it in lo parchina, and we won't make an issue of it because, you already have, it's generally pretty similar to all these, even though it has one difference. But if that's the case, then then the whole Braita doesn't make any sense because what did it do? It started with the arbeh. Then it said whatever's like the arbeh. And then we said, well, the salam is different. So we needed a separate drasha for that because that one has a bald spot. Then we had to add the chargol because that one is a little different because it doesn't have a tail. That one has a tail. The other two didn't have a tail. So the chargol, let's say by the time we got to number 3 on the list, nani deshavu lehu lo lichtov v'tete me'arbe v'salam. You could have just said, if we're being loose about the definition, saying, well, it doesn't have to be everything, then you could have just said, oh, we have the arbeh, we have the salam, that includes with a gabacha, without a gabacha. Let's just say, okay, in the end, what's similar about the two of them? Well, there's 4 legs, 4 wings, it has the other 2 as well, and let's just say, okay, therefore it include all that are like that, even if these don't have a tail, and another one has a tail, you wouldn't need the chargol at all for this purpose. So, el ikal mifrach. So you could say, no. So the reason why you didn't do that is because you could have said, right? What was the reason we didn't do that? We didn't do that because we're going to say the arbeh and the salam don't have a tail. And that's why we needed the chargol. So hachanami, on that same note, why don't we just say, so if we're going to question and we need a special drasha for the chargol because we couldn't learn it from the other 2, then you would need a special drasha and to find some arbeh listed somewhere, some grasshopper that has a long head to include that as well. So it doesn't make sense, the whole drasha that was in this Braita. So Ela Amar Rav Achai, he explains the drasha differently than the Braita did. And he said the way we're going to read it is like this. Salam yiterahu. The word salam is actually not needed at all. Why? Because lo lichtav rachmana salam. Let's say the Torah didn't need to write the word salam. V'teite me'arber me'chargol. And then you would say, there's arbeh, there's chargol. One has gabachat, one doesn't have a gabachat. And from there you could learn about the salam, which also has a gabachat. So you could learn it from the chargol, which has a gabachat. And then, right, to my parachta, mala arbeh she'en lo gabachat, because what are you going to say? Well, the arbeh doesn't have a gabachat, so you can't learn from there to salam. But arei chargol, the yesh lo gabachat, but the chargol does have a gabachat. So from the 2 of them together, you really could have learned the salam. Mala chargol, the yesh lo zanav, harei de arbeh de'en lo zanav. And if you're going to question, well, the chargol has a zanav and the salam doesn't, but who cares? Because arei arbeh de'en lo zanav. In other words, if you put the combo of arbeh and chargol, each one is similar in one way to the salam, and you would have been able to derive the salam from both of them. So, salam dekata rahman alam ali. So why is salam needed? According to Rav Achai, that's what brings us to the drasha of the, even if the head's long. Because, ime no inyan legufo, tenei inyan lerosho aroch. This is a classic midrash, type of drasha, I should say, a method of deriving something from the text, where we say, if it's not needed, we have the salam, which really isn't needed for itself, it must be coming to teach about something else. What's it coming to teach about, even if it has a long head? So when we take the Hargol and the Arbeh, we can learn to the Salam. So we don't need the Salam. The Salam itself comes to say, well, we're going to include something additional. It's, right, all the 4 things that these have in common, plus one more thing that they don't have in common, which is even though all of them, their heads aren't long, if you had a grasshopper with a long head, it would be a problem. It would be, kosher as well. Okay, with that, we're finished here, but we have more to do with the sugya. We're going to continue from here tomorrow. So what we did in the beginning of the daf was we finished up about the bat yainah, showing that the eggs from a non-kosher bird are not kosher, because the bat yainah is the eggs. It's relating to the eggs from the yainah. And we differentiate between that and Kedar LaOmer and the other mentions of bat yainah because of the rules of the sofrim, of the scribes. We went then to the simanim of a bird, of a kosher bird, and we saw all different opinions, more than just what was listed in our Mishnah. And we went through, again, the different ones listed in the Mishnah. And we even ended with one about that depends who they hang out with and who they dwell among. Then we went to the grasshoppers, and we talked about the grasshoppers and how, number one, we went into have to cover most of the body. Which part of the body? Orech or hekef, right, circumference or length. Then we went to what if it doesn't have the simanim, but it will later, then also it's going to be kosher, and we darshan the lo and lo, the way it was written and the way it was pronounced. And then we went to this drasha about what all these grasshoppers are, what every time it says limino, what's that coming to include, all the klals and the prats and klals, right, and all things that are similar to, right, to have a gabachat, not have a gabachat, have a tail, not have a tail, is it long head, not long head. How do we darshan them all? We had a braita, but then Rav Achai had an issue with the binyan av, where we learned about not having, even if it does have a long head, which didn't make any sense. So he reread the braita and had his own way of darshaning it. And with that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone Shabbat Shalom and Shavua Tov.